From the very first moment I met Laura, I knew there was something special about her. It was at a mutual friend's birthday party. She walked into the room, and everything else seemed to fade into the background. Her laughter was infectious, her smile warm and inviting. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter like we were old friends reunited after years apart. It felt effortless, as if we had known each other for a lifetime. As we spent more time together, our connection deepened. Laura was not just beautiful, she was smart, ambitious, and fiercely independent. I admired her drive. She had goals, and she pursued them with relentless determination. I remember the way she lit up when discussing her career aspirations, and I couldn't help but fall more in love with her. It wasn't long before we became inseparable. We decided to take the plunge and move in together. I still recall the excitement of transforming that small, two-bedroom apartment into a cozy home. We painted the walls, picked out furniture, and filled our space with memories, pictures from trips, mementos from our adventures, and, of course, the countless silly notes we left for each other. It was a sanctuary filled with laughter, love, and a palpable sense of partnership. A couple of years later, we tied the knot in a ceremony that felt like a fairy tale. Friends and family surrounded us as we exchanged vows, promising to support and love each other through thick and thin. Laura looked stunning in her lace gown, and as I watched her walk down the aisle, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. That day was a celebration of not just our love but our commitment to building a life together. Before we knew it, our family grew. Our first child, Emily, was born, followed a couple of years later by our son, Daniel. I remember the joy and chaos of those early days, sleepless nights filled with the sweet sound of a baby's cooing, the whirlwind of diaper changes, and the overwhelming love that filled our hearts. Holding my children for the first time was a transformative experience, and Laura and I navigated parenthood side by side, learning and growing together. As the years passed, we built a routine that felt comfortable and secure. Family dinners became a nightly ritual, where we'd gather around the table, sharing stories about our day. The kids would chatter away about their school adventures, and Laura and I would steal glances at each other, reveling in the joy of our little family. Weekend outings became a tradition as well, trips to the park, hiking in the nearby woods, and spontaneous road trips that led us to discover hidden gems in our state. Yet, amidst the laughter and love, we both pursued our careers with passion. Laura thrived in her job, climbing the corporate ladder, while I found fulfillment in my work as well. We supported each other's aspirations, cheering on our successes and comforting each other through setbacks. We were a team, tackling challenges together and celebrating each milestone, both big and small. Life, as we knew it, felt perfect. We were not just husband and wife, we were partners in every sense of the word, raising our children with love, teaching them the values we held dear, and nurturing their dreams. Our house became a home, filled with warmth and affection, a haven where laughter echoed in the halls, and love flowed freely. Looking back now, I see it as an idyllic world, one I took for granted. We were living in what felt like a beautiful bubble, blissfully unaware of the storm that would soon shatter our perfect life. Little did I know that this seemingly perfect existence was teetering on the brink of chaos, and my heart would soon be thrust into turmoil. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the soft flutter of wings just outside the window. I first noticed the change in Laura's routine a few months ago. At first, I chalked it up to her increasing workload. After all, her job had become more demanding. She was working for a prestigious company, and with a recent promotion, the stakes were higher. Late nights in the office became more frequent, and I convinced myself that this was simply part of her ambition and commitment to her career. Laura had always been passionate about her work. She thrived on challenges, often bringing home reports to review or presentations to finalize. There were times I would watch her, completely engrossed in her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her face, her brow furrowed in concentration. I admired her dedication and often found myself caught up in her enthusiasm. Yet, as the weeks rolled into months, what initially seemed like normal job pressure morphed into something more concerning. It was the small things that began to gnaw at me. One night, I waited for her to return home for dinner, setting the table with our favorite dishes: grilled chicken with roasted vegetables, Emily's favorite, and a side of mashed potatoes for Daniel. I remember pacing the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes, trying to shake the unease creeping in. When Laura finally walked through the door, her face was flushed, her hair slightly tousled. She offered a quick apology, explaining that an unexpected meeting had run late. I accepted her explanation, trying to shake off the feeling that something was amiss. But then the pattern continued. She started leaving earlier in the mornings, often claiming she had a full schedule or needed to prep for an important meeting. I found myself becoming more and more aware of her whereabouts, unable to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. It wasn't just the late nights, it was the way she began to change her habits. I noticed her phone was often face down on the table, and if it buzzed with a message, she would quickly glance at it, then dismiss it as if it were nothing. Those small gestures, once so unremarkable, began to seem suspicious. I tried to convince myself that I was being irrational, that my mind was simply running wild with worry. Laura had always been trustworthy, we had built our lives on mutual respect and honesty. Yet, a seed of doubt had been planted, and no amount of rationalization could remove it. I had always prided myself on being secure in our relationship, but this new dynamic felt foreign and unsettling. There was one evening that stood out vividly in my memory. Laura was unusually distant at dinner. The kids were laughing and joking, sharing their day's adventures, but she barely engaged. Her mind seemed to be elsewhere, lost in thought. When I asked her about her day, she answered with vague platitudes. Her eyes drifting to the window as if searching for something beyond our home. I tried to probe a little deeper, hoping to draw her back into the moment, but she brushed me off, claiming she was just tired. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a weight settle on my chest. I wanted to reach out to her, to bridge the distance that seemed to grow between us, but I also felt an instinctive pull to retreat into silence. What could I say that wouldn't sound accusatory or paranoid? So instead, I turned over and stared at the ceiling, replaying our conversations, the laughter that seemed to echo in the hallways of my mind, now tinged with doubt. Days turned into weeks, and I fell into a cycle of second-guessing myself. Each time she came home late, I would find myself concocting elaborate scenarios in my head, painting vivid pictures of her long hours at the office. Maybe she was working on a big project. Maybe her team was short-staffed, and she was picking up the slack. Maybe, just maybe, she was genuinely busy. But the little signs kept piling up, missing texts, hushed phone calls, and those rare moments when she would seem lost in thought, her gaze drifting far away. Despite my growing concerns, I held on to the belief that my intuition was misguided. Laura had always encouraged me to pursue my career ambitions. She understood the demands of the professional world. How could I doubt her now? I wanted to believe that I was being silly, that my insecurities were rooted in the fear of losing something so precious to me. It was a seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon when everything changed. I had met up with a few friends at our favorite bar to unwind after a long week. As we laughed and shared stories over cold beers, the atmosphere was relaxed, filled with the familiar camaraderie that made us all feel at home. We reminisced about old times, joked about our various mishaps, and, as always, teased each other about our relationships. That's when one of my friends, Mark, casually dropped a bombshell that would shatter my world. "You know, I saw Laura the other night," he said, taking a sip of his drink. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't even mentioned Laura, and suddenly, I felt a rush of anxiety surge through me. Yeah, I was at that new Italian place downtown. She was there with some guy, looked like a colleague. I felt the air leave my lungs. The casual way Mark spoke, as if it were nothing, only added to the weight of his words. "What do you mean, some guy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the tension creeping in. "What guy?" Mark shrugged, looking slightly bemused by my sudden shift in demeanor. "Just some dude from her office, I think. They were sitting at a corner table, laughing and enjoying dinner together. Didn't look like a work meeting to me." Every word felt like a dagger piercing through my chest. I forced myself to breathe, reminding myself that I had no evidence, no reason to jump to conclusions. But my mind was racing, connecting dots that had never seemed so apparent before. The late nights, the distance, the secretive phone behavior, all of it suddenly made sense in a way that terrified me. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, my friends chattering away, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. I managed to keep up with the conversation, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of Laura and that man. Who was he? What did he want? Was he just a friend, or something more? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and as the evening wore on, It became increasingly clear that I couldn't ignore this any longer. The moment I got home, my heart was racing. Laura had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I tiptoed around, trying to stay calm, but the questions swirled in my mind like a storm. I had never been the type to invade her privacy, but desperation clawed at me. I had to know the truth. I glanced at her phone resting on the kitchen counter, its screen dark and still. My pulse quickened. It felt wrong, but I felt I had no choice. I picked up the phone, heart pounding in my chest, and, without thinking, unlocked it using the passcode I had seen her enter countless times before. My hands trembled as I navigated to her messages. As I scrolled through her conversations, my heart sank further with each message that appeared. There were work-related discussions with colleagues and exchanges of jokes and memes with friends, but it was the messages with him, her colleague, that made my stomach churn. I found the conversation, and the world around me began to fade away. The first few messages seemed innocuous enough, discussing work projects and deadlines, but then things shifted. I felt a pit forming in my stomach as I read the words between them. They talked about meeting up after work, sharing laughter and inside jokes that felt intimate, far too intimate for mere colleagues. Then, I stumbled upon the messages that shattered my heart into a million pieces. There were plans for romantic dinners, secretive late-night chats, and flirtatious banter that made my skin crawl. I read as he expressed his excitement about their meetings, and she responded with playful enthusiasm, her words dripping with affection that was meant for me. It felt like a betrayal in its most raw form. The air in the room became thick and suffocating, and I felt my heart breaking with each line I read. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind raced back to those moments of doubt, the late nights, the distance, the vague excuses. They all suddenly coalesced into a single, devastating realization. I had been living a lie. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to process the emotions flooding over me: anger, sadness, betrayal. It felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. This was the woman I loved, the mother of my children, and here she was, sharing her heart with another man. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she do this? Did she ever love me? How long had this been going on? I sat there in the dark kitchen, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline, each message burning into my mind like a scar. The laughter we had shared over family dinners, the dreams we had built together, it all felt like a cruel joke now. I was left grappling with the harsh truth that shattered the beautiful illusion I had cherished for so long. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer stay passive. I had to confront this head on, but how? My heart ached, and the thought of facing Laura filled me with dread. What would I say? How could I even begin to address this betrayal? Yet, as I sat alone in the dark, I understood that the path ahead would demand more courage than I ever thought I had. The truth was out, and it was time to confront the reality of our shattered life. In the days that followed my heart-wrenching discovery, I felt as if I had been thrust into a tempest. The initial shock of betrayal was overwhelming, but as the anger settled in, a different kind of clarity emerged. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. The flames of betrayal ignited a fierce determination within me. I could confront Laura and unleash a torrent of emotions, but that felt too simple, too easy. No, I needed a plan, one that would make her understand the gravity of her actions without falling into the trap of an open conflict. As I sat at my desk, my mind raced through the possibilities. I thought about the man who had woven himself into the fabric of our lives. He was not just her colleague, he was the catalyst for the chaos that had invaded my world. I remembered how Mark had mentioned that he had overheard them discussing a job offer at another branch of the company. The gears in my mind began to turn, and a sinister idea took root. What if I could use that job offer against her? I could orchestrate her transfer, setting her on a path that would not only distance her from me but also force her to choose between her career and the man she had chosen over our family. I leaned back in my chair, contemplating the implications of this plan. It wouldn't just be a form of revenge, it would also serve as a harsh lesson in the consequences of her infidelity. The next step was to gather information. I had worked at the same company long enough to know the ins and outs, and I was well acquainted with some of the key decision-makers. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, subtly probing for information about the potential transfer. They mentioned that her lover had indeed been suggesting she consider the new position, framing it as a significant career opportunity. It made sense, after all. Who wouldn't want to follow their heart, especially when it came packaged with a promotion? My heart raced with anticipation as I began to formulate my plan. I knew I could leverage my connections to facilitate this transfer. I reached out to a few contacts in the HR department, expressing my support for Laura's professional growth. I presented the idea of the transfer as a positive opportunity, one that would help her broaden her horizons and elevate her career. I played my role perfectly, feigning excitement and encouraging them to see the potential benefits. As the days went by, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was no longer the victim, I was taking control of the narrative. I pictured Laura's reaction when she was presented with the offer to move away, leaving behind not just our home but also our children. I envisioned her sitting at the kitchen table, torn between the allure of a new job and the reality of her choices. It was the perfect revenge. Force her to confront the reality of her betrayal in a way that would leave a lasting impact. Once I had laid the groundwork for her transfer, the pieces began to fall into place. I arranged a meeting with a key player in the company, someone who had always respected my opinion. Over coffee, I casually mentioned Laura's potential for growth within the company, praising her work ethic and dedication. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as I laid out the benefits of her moving to the new branch. Honestly, I said, leaning in slightly, I think it would be a fantastic opportunity for her. It would allow her to step into a leadership role and work alongside some talented people. I could feel the tension in the air as he nodded, taking in my words. I had planted the seed, and now I had to ensure it took root. A week later, I received a call from HR, confirming that Laura was being considered for the position. I played the role of the supportive husband, feigning enthusiasm when I discussed it with her at home. "You should consider it, Laura," I said, trying to mask the edge in my voice. "It could be a great step forward for you." I watched her closely as I spoke, gauging her reaction. At first, she seemed hesitant, but the more I pressed, the more I saw her interest piqued. It was almost as if she was weighing her options, the lure of ambition competing with the reality of her life here. I knew that deep down, the prospect of a fresh start with her lover was tempting, but it also meant leaving everything we had built behind. When the official offer came through, I watched her face change as she read the email. It was a mixture of surprise and excitement. "Wow, they think I have what it takes," she exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with the possibility. My heart twisted at the sight, but I quickly buried the feeling. I was playing a long game now, and this was just the beginning. I let the news settle in before I brought up the realities of the situation. "You know, Laura," I said one evening, trying to sound casual, "this could mean a big change for us. A new city, new challenges, it's a lot to consider." The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see her thoughts racing as she processed everything. She hesitated, glancing away. "I mean, it's a great opportunity, but what about the kids? I don't want to disrupt their lives." Her voice trembled slightly, and I seized the moment. "It's a big decision, and I know you're committed to your career. But think about how much you could grow from this experience." With each passing day, the tension grew. Laura seemed torn between her career aspirations and her responsibilities as a mother. I could see the internal struggle playing out in her expressions, the way her brow furrowed when she thought no one was watching. Each conversation felt like a delicate dance, one that I orchestrated with meticulous care. As she weighed her options, I knew that I had her right where I wanted her. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was the one in control, pulling the strings of a narrative she had created. I had turned her desires against her, manipulating the situation in a way that would ultimately force her to confront the consequences of her actions. In my mind, the plan unfolded perfectly. I envisioned the moment she would have to make a choice: leave behind her family for her career and the man who had betrayed our trust, or stay and face the reality of what she had done. Either way, she would be forced to reckon with her decisions, and I would stand as the silent architect of her fate, waiting for the day when the truth would finally come to light. The day finally arrived when Laura was presented with the offer for the transfer. I had been waiting for this moment with bated breath, knowing that it would serve as the climax of my meticulously crafted plan. When I saw the official email confirming the details, a sense of satisfaction washed over me, but I knew the real challenge lay in how she would react when confronted with this ultimatum. The evening was tense as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the remnants of our family dinner scattered before us. The children had gone to bed, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of our home. Laura stared at her phone, her expression shifting from excitement to apprehension as she read through the offer letter for what felt like the 100th time. Laura, you okay? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though my heart raced with anticipation. She looked up, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. Yeah, I'm fine, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. I can't believe this is happening. A new position in a different city. It's a lot to take in. Of course. It is, I said, feigning sympathy. But think of the opportunities. You've always said you wanted to expand your career, and this could be a perfect chance for you to do that. I watched her closely, noticing the conflict flickering behind her eyes. She was caught in a web of her own making, and I was determined to keep her tangled within it. I know, but, she hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. What about the kids? I don't want to uproot their lives. Moving away is a big deal. Her voice trembled slightly, and I sensed her trying to grasp onto any rational reason to resist the transfer. I leaned in, deliberately lowering my voice. Laura, the kids will adapt. They're resilient. And you deserve this. You've worked so hard for it. I watched as her brows knitted together, the internal battle raging within her. She was caught between her responsibilities as a mother and her ambitions, an all too familiar struggle that I had deliberately set in motion. For a moment, silence enveloped us. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she weighed her options. In that pause, I seized the opportunity to nudge her toward my desired outcome. And, well, think about it this way, if you take this position, you'll be closer to him. Her eyes flickered with surprise, and I could see the realization dawn upon her. The implications of my words hung heavily in the air, unspoken yet understood. The thrill of being near her lover was now intertwined with the fear of leaving her children behind. I could see her contemplating the trade-off, her career, her freedom, and the allure of love versus her role as a mother. I don't know if I'm ready to make such a drastic change, she finally said, her voice wavering. I mean, what if it doesn't work out? What if I regret it? That's the risk we all take when we pursue what we want, isn't it? I replied smoothly, feigning an understanding that I did not truly feel. You've always said you didn't want to live with regrets, Laura. This could be your chance to live for yourself for once. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and I could see the turmoil etched across her face. The realization of the ultimatum before her had sunk in deeper than I expected. I felt a pang of guilt creeping in, but I pushed it away. This was about consequences, a bitter pill that she needed to swallow for her choices. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly as she conceded. Maybe you're right. Maybe it would be good for me. I could finally focus on my career without all the distractions here. The words fell from her lips like a resignation, and I couldn't help but feel a swell of triumph. She was trapped in a web of her design, and now she was agreeing to walk right into my carefully laid out plan. That's the spirit, I exclaimed, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. This could be the start of something incredible for you, Laura. As the conversation continued, she spoke more about the potential of the new position, her excitement gradually surfacing once again. I watched her transform before my eyes, her face lighting up with visions of what her life could be like if she accepted this opportunity. It was a surreal juxtaposition. While she was envisioning a brighter future, I felt a darker satisfaction creeping in, knowing that her choices were leading her further away from the life we had built together. Of course, I added casually, you'll have to consider what this means for us. For the kids, I'll support whatever you decide, but you need to think about how this will change things. I played my role as the concerned husband, hiding the smirk that threatened to break free. At that moment, I could see her mind racing. The prospect of a new life with her lover loomed tantalizingly close, while the weight of family responsibilities hung heavy on her heart. I had pushed her to a point of no return, and the decision she was making would ripple through the very fabric of our family. As the conversation wound down, Laura's initial resistance had melted away, replaced by an almost palpable sense of acceptance. She was going to take the transfer, believing it would bring her closer to her lover and further away from the life she had known. In her eyes, I could see the glimmer of hope, the misguided belief that this would somehow solve everything, that she could have her cake and eat it too. But little did she know, this was just the beginning of her reckoning. I smiled to myself, knowing that she had chosen the path I had laid before her and that the consequences would soon come crashing down like waves against the shore. The stage was set, and as I watched her excitement grow, I felt the anticipation of what was to come. The game was no longer just about revenge, it was about unveiling the truth in a way that would leave an indelible mark on her heart. The transition to the new branch was anything but smooth for Laura. I had watched her excitement morph into an overwhelming sense of anxiety as she began to navigate the challenges of her new role. It became clear that her decision to pursue this opportunity, motivated by the allure of her lover and career advancement, came with a host of unforeseen complications. From the moment she stepped into the office of the new branch, Laura was met with an environment that felt vastly different from the familiarity of her previous workplace. The layout was unfamiliar, the faces new, and the dynamics were still being established. She had always thrived on the connections she had cultivated over the years, and the abrupt shift left her feeling isolated and disoriented. On her first day, Laura returned home with a look of exhaustion etched on her face. "It's so different here," she admitted, dropping her bag onto the floor and slumping onto the couch. "I thought it would be easy to jump in, but I feel like I'm starting from scratch." I leaned against the wall, observing her closely. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, though a part of me relished the turmoil she was experiencing. "I don't know anyone. It's like everyone already has their own established groups and relationships. I can't seem to break in," she explained, frustration lacing her words. "At my old job, I had friends and allies who supported me. Here, I'm just a stranger." I could see the cracks forming in her bravado. Laura had always been confident and assertive, but now, stripped of her safety net, she was vulnerable. The very foundation of her identity was being shaken, and as the days wore on, I noted her struggles only intensified. As she navigated the complexities of her new role, Laura found herself under immense pressure to perform. Her boss, a demanding figure with high expectations, made it clear that she needed to deliver results quickly to prove her worth to the team. It wasn't long before Laura realized that the position she had viewed as a step up was now a double-edged sword. "I had no idea how much work it would be," she confided in me one evening, her eyes weary and her voice tinged with defeat. "I thought I could handle it, but every day feels like I'm drowning. The projects are piled high, and I barely have time to breathe, let alone connect with anyone." Each night, as I listened to her recount the trials of her day, a part of me felt an unsettling satisfaction. She had chosen this path, lured by the prospect of being closer to her lover, but the reality was far from the romantic fantasy she had envisioned. Instead of the effortless connection she had hoped for, she was faced with the stark realization of her isolation. The work culture at the new branch was intense, marked by a competitive atmosphere that seemed to smother her every effort. While she was trying to prove herself, her colleagues were already forming alliances and navigating their agendas. Laura felt as if she were swimming against a strong current, and every attempt to engage or build rapport seemed to backfire. "Today, I tried to join a lunch group," she said one evening, her voice cracking with frustration. "But they didn't include me. It felt like they were just tolerating my presence. I don't know if it's just me, but I can't shake this feeling of being an outsider." Each tale she told of her struggles only deepened my sense of purpose. She had sought this change, thinking it would liberate her and bring her closer to the man she was willing to sacrifice so much for. But in doing so, she had unknowingly cut herself off from her support system, and now she was paying the price. As the weeks progressed, Laura's stress began to manifest in other ways. I watched as she became increasingly withdrawn, her once vibrant demeanor dulled by the weight of her circumstances. The late nights at work stretched longer, and her calls and texts to her lover became more frequent as if she were seeking refuge in their conversations, trying to escape the reality she now faced. "Sometimes I feel like I made a mistake," she confessed one night, her voice barely above a whisper as she curled up beside me on the couch. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. I wanted to reach out and comfort her, but I also relished the realization that her choices were not turning out as she had hoped. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning ignorance, though I knew exactly what she was referring to. "I thought this move would be exciting. A fresh start," she replied, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and longing. "But now, it feels like I've lost everything. My friends, my confidence? I'm just not sure if this is where I belong." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, and I felt a surge of triumph. She was finally facing the consequences of her decisions, and with every passing day, I could see her slowly unraveling. I wanted to believe that this was just the beginning of her reckoning, that soon she would understand the depths of her betrayal and the sacrifices she had made for a fleeting moment of passion. As the days turned into weeks, Laura's struggles at work compounded, and the toll it took on her began to seep into our home life. The tension between us was palpable, and the joy that once filled our household started to wane. I could sense her frustration simmering beneath the surface. And as she tried to juggle her responsibilities as a mother, her career aspirations, and her emotional turmoil, I wondered how long she could maintain this facade before it all came crashing down. Despite her attempts to mask her struggles, I could see through her carefully constructed walls. The laughter we once shared became infrequent, replaced by awkward silences and tension-laden conversations. I knew that deep down, she was beginning to question her choices, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The walls she had built around her life were slowly closing in, and I was left waiting, knowing that the reckoning was still to come. Laura's journey in the new branch had transformed from a hopeful endeavor into a daunting challenge, and as she continued to grapple with her decision, I braced myself for the moment when the truth would finally come to light. I was ready to watch her confront the reality of her actions, and I knew that the pain she felt now would pale in comparison to what awaited her on the horizon. As the weeks passed, it became painfully clear that Laura's choices were deeply affecting our family. The warmth she once radiated was fading, and as she devoted herself to her demanding job, I watched helplessly as she grew distant from her role as a mother. Our children, Ethan and Lily, began to feel the void her absence created, their once eager smiles dimming into quiet acceptance. One evening, I came home hoping to find solace, only to discover the kids engrossed in a TV show without any sign of Laura. "Where's Mom?" I asked. Ethan shrugged, and Lily replied, "She's still at work." My heart sank at her words. They had grown accustomed to her absence, and it hurt to see them coping without her. As Laura continued to come home late, she brought with her an aura of exhaustion and distraction. I would often find her staring blankly out the window, lost in her thoughts. One day, I gently asked, "Everything okay?" She forced a smile and admitted, "I feel like I'm not there for the kids the way I should be." The guilt in her eyes was palpable. During dinner, the atmosphere was heavy with silence. When Lily held up her drawing, hoping for her mother's enthusiastic praise, Laura's lackluster response made it clear that her mind was elsewhere. "Maybe later," she said dismissively when Ethan asked to play a game, choosing instead to check her phone. The kids were yearning for connection, and I often stepped in to fill the void. I engaged with them, helped with homework, and tried to maintain family traditions. But the impact of Laura's absence was unmistakable. One day, Ethan asked if Laura would come to his soccer game. "I'll talk to her," I replied, knowing deep down that the answer would likely be disappointing. When I confronted Laura about her priorities, she brushed it off, insisting she had to work for our future. That weekend, as I cheered for Ethan from the sidelines, I saw him scanning the crowd for Laura. When the game ended, his disappointment was evident. "Did Mom come?" he asked, his hope dwindling. I forced a smile, wanting to shield him from the truth, but I knew the reality was unavoidable. Later, I confronted Laura, saying, "The kids are feeling your absence. You need to reassess your priorities." She replied defensively, "I'm doing this for us." I countered, "But you're sacrificing the present for a future that may never happen. They need you now." Her silence spoke volumes. The weight of my words settled in, and I realized that the longer she remained entangled in her choices, the more the family would suffer. As I reflect on the journey that brought us to this moment, I can't help but feel a profound sense of loss. Laura, once so vibrant and full of life, has unraveled in ways I never thought possible. The decisions she made, driven by ambition and a misguided sense of love, have cost her everything: her career, her family, and the precious moments she could have shared with our children. It's a heartbreaking reality that weighs heavily on my heart. Laura had always been the cornerstone of our family, juggling her career and motherhood with grace. She was a dedicated worker, admired by her colleagues, and a loving mother who was always there for Ethan and Lily. But the allure of a new job and a fleeting romance led her down a path of destruction. As her world spiraled out of control, I watched helplessly, feeling a mix of anger, sorrow, and even a sense of vindication for the choices I had orchestrated. The fallout was swift. Laura's new job at the other branch, which she had believed would be a fresh start, quickly became a source of immense stress and dissatisfaction. The pressure to perform was relentless, and her connection to her colleagues was non-existent. She often returned home exhausted, both physically and emotionally, her spirit gradually fading. I could see the toll it took on her. Her laughter had become rare, and the light in her eyes dimmed to a mere flicker. The distance she created between herself and our children was palpable. Ethan and Lily, once so excited to share their days with her, began to withdraw, adapting to a new normal where their mother was frequently absent. I stepped in, trying to fill the gap, but it was clear that nothing could replace the bond they once shared with her. The children yearned for her presence, for her affection, and it broke my heart to see their disappointment every time Laura missed a soccer game or a school event. It wasn't just a career she was sacrificing, it was her identity as a mother, a role that she had cherished. The realization of what she had lost began to sink in slowly. I saw it in her moments of reflection when she would catch herself staring at old family photos, her eyes clouded with regret. Yet, even in her sorrow, there was a stubbornness that held her back from admitting her mistakes, from recognizing that the pursuit of her lover had cost her everything that truly mattered. As the months passed, the consequences of her choices became more evident. Laura's once promising career began to unravel. Her boss, who had once supported her, grew frustrated with her lack of focus and commitment. Rumors started to swirl around the office, whispers about her inability to manage the responsibilities she had eagerly taken on. With each passing day, her dream job slipped further from her grasp, and she faced the harsh reality of being on the brink of losing her position entirely. It was at this point that the full weight of her situation hit her. One evening, she came home with tears streaming down her face, the veneer of control she had maintained finally cracking. "I don't know how it came to this," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I could have it all, but now I feel like I've lost everything." Her words struck me deeply. The satisfaction I had initially felt in my carefully laid plans began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of emptiness. I had set out to orchestrate her downfall, to take revenge on the woman who had betrayed me, yet watching her suffer brought me no joy. The pain I inflicted only deepened the wounds within our family, and I found myself grappling with the consequences of my actions. The realization hit me like a wave: revenge had not brought me the closure I sought. Instead, it had created a chasm between us, a rift that seemed insurmountable. I was left with a family in disarray and a wife who was a mere shadow of her former self. How could I reconcile my anger with the love I still held for her? The answer was elusive, and I felt a sense of despair settling in. As I looked at the faces of our children, who were struggling to understand why their mother was absent and their home felt so different, I realized that the damage went far beyond Laura's choices. Our family, once a tapestry of love and laughter, was now frayed and tattered. It was not just Laura who had lost, we all had. The bond we shared, the memories we had built together, felt like they were slipping through my fingers like sand. In the quiet moments of reflection, I was left with a haunting question: how do you mend what has been broken? How do you rebuild a family when the foundations have been shaken to their core? I wanted to find a way to help Laura reclaim her life, to show her that it was not too late to rediscover her role as a mother and a partner. I wanted her to understand that while the choices she made were irreversible, it was possible to forge a new path, one that included our children and the life we had once cherished. But the journey toward healing would require effort from both of us. I realized that I needed to approach Laura with empathy, to help her navigate her way through the wreckage of her choices, rather than push her further away. Perhaps, together, we could find a way back to each other and to the family we once were. In the end, as I sat in the quiet of our home, surrounded by memories of happier times, I understood that the road ahead would be challenging. Yet, I was willing to fight for my family, to work toward restoring the connections that had been severed. Love was still there, buried beneath layers of hurt and betrayal, and perhaps it was time to nurture it back to life. I was left wondering if we could rebuild our family from the ashes, or if we were destined to remain forever fractured. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing: it was a journey I was ready to undertake, no matter how difficult it might be.